The evening sky had already turned dark when Thomas Elliot packed up his law books at the university library. The clock on his phone read 10:38 p.m. His study group for constitutional law had run longer than expected, but with finals just 2 weeks away, every minute counted. Thomas rubbed his tired eyes and said goodnight to the security guard as he pushed through the heavy doors into the cool spring air. At 23, Thomas carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew his path in life. The son of Senator Richard Elliot, he had grown up in the spotlight but worked hard to make his own way. His father's position had opened doors, but Thomas had earned his place at the prestigious law school through his own merit, maintaining a near-perfect GPA while volunteering at a legal aid clinic on weekends. The campus parking lot was nearly empty. Thomas's dark blue sedan sat under a flickering streetlight, a gift from his parents when he'd been accepted to law school. He tossed his heavy backpack onto the passenger seat and slid behind the wheel, looking forward to getting home, maybe catching a few hours of sleep before another early morning of studying. The drive from campus to his apartment usually took 15 minutes. Thomas followed his regular route, passing through downtown before turning onto the tree-lined streets of his father's district. The radio played softly in the background, a late-night talk show discussing the upcoming congressional vote on infrastructure. He smiled faintly hearing his father's name mentioned among the senators expected to shape the final bill. Thomas noticed the police cruiser in his rearview mirror about 3 blocks from home. He checked his speed, 5 under the limit, and continued driving, thinking nothing of it. When the cruiser's lights flashed on, he felt a flutter of confusion. Had he missed a stop sign? Was one of his taillights out? Following procedure as his father had taught him, Thomas signaled and pulled to the curb, keeping his hands visible on the steering wheel. He took a deep breath, reminding himself this was probably routine. The cruiser stopped behind him, headlights glaring into his mirrors, momentarily blinding him. 2 officers emerged, not the casual approach Thomas expected for a minor traffic stop. Their hands rested on their holstered weapons as they approached, flashlights aimed directly at his face. "Step out of the vehicle," the taller officer called out, his voice sharp and commanding. Thomas blinked against the bright light. "Officer, may I ask what—" "Step out of the vehicle now." The second officer was already moving to the passenger side, flashlight beams sweeping across the interior of the car. Thomas's heart hammered in his chest. "I'm going to unbuckle my seatbelt," he said clearly, moving slowly. "I'm opening the door now." The night air felt suddenly cold as he stepped out, the officers maintaining their distance, their postures tense. "Hands where we can see them. Turn and face the vehicle." The taller officer, Thomas could now see the name Reynolds on his uniform, moved closer. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm Thomas Elliot. I was just driving home from—" Officer Reynolds cut him off. "I said face the vehicle and put your hands on the hood." Thomas complied, confusion giving way to the first stirrings of fear. "Can you tell me what this is about?" Instead of answering, Reynolds roughly kicked his feet further apart and began patting him down. The second officer, whose nameplate read Brandt, circled the car, peering inside with his flashlight. "We got a report of a suspicious vehicle in the area," Reynolds finally said, his tone flat. "Dark sedan, male driver, matches your description." Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "My description? What description exactly?" Reynolds ignored the question. "You got ID?" "In my wallet, back pocket," Thomas said, keeping his voice level despite the growing knot in his stomach. The officer retrieved the wallet, flipping it open to examine his driver's license. Something in his demeanor shifted subtly as he read the name, but his face remained impassive. "Where you coming from tonight, Mr. Elliot?" There was something in the way Reynolds emphasized his last name, a hint of something Thomas couldn't quite place. "The university library. I'm a law student. I was studying with my group until about 10:30. Thomas watched as Brandt opened his passenger door without asking permission, rifling through his backpack. "Officer, do you have a warrant to search my car?" Reynolds stepped closer. "You giving me attitude, boy? You think you're special?" The word boy hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning. Thomas felt his mouth go dry. "No, sir. I'm just asking about my rights." "Rights?" Reynolds scoffed, exchanging a look with his partner. "You got rights when I say you got rights." Across the street, a woman had stepped onto her porch, phone held up. clearly recording the interaction. Thomas noticed her but kept his attention on the officers. Brandt had emptied Thomas's backpack onto the passenger seat, law books and notebooks splayed open. "Nothing here?" Brandt called out, sounding almost disappointed. Reynolds still held Thomas's ID, studying it again. "Senator's kid, huh? That your daddy's district we're standing in right now?" The question carried a weight Thomas immediately recognized. "This wasn't random. My father has nothing to do with this," he said carefully. "I'd like to know why I've been stopped." Reynolds moved suddenly, grabbing Thomas's arm and spinning him around. Before he could react, cold metal handcuffs closed around his wrists. "What are you doing?" Thomas's voice rose with alarm. "I haven't done anything." "You fit the description," Reynolds repeated, tightening the cuffs until they bit into Thomas's skin. "We got reports of drug activity in this area." "Drug activity? That's absurd. You can search the entire car. There's nothing illegal in there." Thomas struggled to keep his voice steady. "You know who I am. You know who my father is." Reynolds leaned in close, his breath hot on Thomas's ear. "That's exactly the problem, isn't it? You people think the rules don't apply to you." A small crowd had begun to gather on the sidewalk, neighbors drawn by the flashing lights and raised voices. Someone called out asking if Thomas was okay. The woman on the porch had moved closer, still filming. "Officers, this is being recorded," Thomas said quietly. "There are witnesses." Something ugly flashed across Reynolds' face. He grabbed Thomas by the arm and marched him toward the police cruiser. "You threatening me? You think your daddy's name is going to save you?" "Not tonight." Thomas's head struck the roof of the cruiser as Reynolds shoved him into the back seat. Pain bloomed above his temple. Through the window, he could see Brandt still searching his car, throwing his belongings carelessly onto the street. "My father is Senator Elliott," Thomas said, fighting to keep his voice from shaking. "He works with your department." One phone call? Reynolds laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "You think I'm scared of some politician? Your kind stick together, but out here, I'm the law." Through the cruiser window, Thomas could see more people gathering, phones out, recording the scene. An older man approached Officer Brandt, gesturing angrily. Brandt stepped back, hand moving to his weapon. Reynolds saw it too and moved quickly back to his partner. Thomas couldn't hear what was said, but the tension in the air was palpable, stretching tight like a wire about to snap. The next few minutes blurred together. More words were exchanged between the officers and the growing crowd. Reynolds returned to the cruiser, his face hard with anger. Without a word, he yanked open the door and pulled Thomas out, unlocking the handcuffs with rough movements. "This isn't over," he muttered, shoving Thomas's wallet and keys into his chest. "Tell your father I said hello." As quickly as it had begun, it was ending. The officers retreated to their vehicle, leaving Thomas standing on the sidewalk surrounded by scattered textbooks and concerned neighbors. His wrists were raw where the handcuffs had been, and he could feel a welt forming where his head had struck the car. The woman who had been filming approached, her phone still in her hand. "I got all of that," she said quietly. "My name is Elena Cortez. I'm a reporter with the local paper." "This isn't right." Thomas nodded, still processing what had happened. His hands trembled slightly as he gathered his belongings from the street. "Thank you," he managed to say. "They recognized you," Elena said, helping him collect a notebook. "I heard them. They knew exactly who you were." Thomas met her eyes, understanding dawning cold and clear. This hadn't been a mistake or a case of mistaken identity. The officers had targeted him deliberately, knowing he was Senator Elliott's son. As the police cruiser pulled away, Thomas stood in the pool of the streetlight, his world fundamentally altered. Tomorrow the video would spread across social media. His father would see it. Questions would be asked. But tonight all Thomas could feel was the lingering terror and humiliation, and the certainty that something had been taken from him that he might never get back. By sunrise, the video had already spread like wildfire. Elena Cortez had posted it online shortly after midnight, and within hours it had been shared thousands of times. Thomas woke to his phone buzzing continuously with notifications, calls, and text messages. His head throbbed where it had struck the police cruiser, a small cut above his eyebrow now surrounded by a purplish bruise. He sat on the edge of his bed, scrolling through messages from friends asking if he was okay, from classmates expressing outrage, from people he barely knew offering support. His father had called 7 times. Thomas hadn't answered, not yet. He needed time to process what had happened, to understand it himself before trying to explain it to anyone else. The morning news played on his laptop, the volume low. He watched with a strange detachment as his own face appeared on screen, the footage from last night playing for all to see. The anchor's voice sounded distant as she described the incident. Senator Richard Elliott's son, Thomas, was detained by police last night in what many are calling a clear case of racial profiling and possible police misconduct. The officers involved have been identified as James Reynolds and Peter Brandt of the 5th Precinct. Thomas closed the laptop, unable to watch anymore. His phone rang again, his father. This time he answered, "Thomas, thank God, are you all right? I've been trying to reach you all morning." The senator's voice was tight with worry and barely controlled anger. "I'm okay, Dad." Thomas touched the bruise on his forehead gently, physically anyway. "I'm coming over right now. Don't talk to anyone until I get there. The press is going crazy with this." Thomas sighed, suddenly feeling exhausted despite having just woken up. "Dad, the police commissioner called me at 5 a.m., his father continued, not hearing him. "They're looking into the matter, looking into it. I told him I want those officers suspended immediately. This is completely unacceptable. If Elena Cortez hadn't been there filming." His father's voice faded as Thomas's mind drifted back to the night before, to the cold metal of handcuffs against his skin, to Officer Reynolds' voice. "You think your daddy's name is going to save you? Not tonight, Thomas. Are you listening to me?" He blinked, coming back to the present. "Yeah, Dad, I'm here. I'll be there in 20 minutes. We need to get ahead of this." After hanging up, Thomas forced himself to shower and change. The hot water stung the raw marks on his wrists where the handcuffs had cut into his skin. He stood in front of the mirror afterward, looking at his reflection. The same face, the same eyes, but something had changed. He felt it deep inside, a fundamental shift in how he viewed the world and his place in it. His father arrived exactly when he said he would, bursting through the door with the energy of a man half his age. At 57, Senator Richard Elliott was still an imposing figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair, and the confident bearing of someone used to commanding rooms. Right now, though, his face was creased with worry and barely contained fury. "Let me see." He tilted Thomas's chin up, examining the bruise. "They did this to you?" "While you were handcuffed?" Thomas nodded. "When Officer Reynolds pushed me into the car." "This ends today," the senator said, jaw tight. "I've already spoken to the mayor. There will be a press conference at noon." "Dad, wait." Thomas moved away, needing space. "I don't know if I'm ready for a press conference." "The story's already out there, son. Elena Cortez has been on 3 networks this morning. If we don't take control of the narrative..." "The narrative?" Thomas interrupted, a flash of anger cutting through his numbness. "This isn't about politics, Dad. This happened to me. They targeted me because of who you are, because of what you stand for." The senator went still, his expression shifting. "What does that mean?" "Your voting record, Dad, your stance on police oversight. You've opposed every reform bill that's come across your desk, and Reynolds knew exactly who I was." The room fell quiet, the only sound the distant hum of traffic outside. Senator Elliott sank into a chair, suddenly looking every year of his age. "You think they did this to send me a message?" "I don't know." Thomas ran a hand over his face. "But Reynolds told me to tell you hello." Before his father could respond, Thomas's phone rang again. This time it was Dean Patterson from the law school. The dean expressed concern over what had happened and offered Thomas an extension on his upcoming assignments. Thomas thanked him, but his mind was elsewhere. By midday, the story had grown even larger. The police department issued a statement standing by Officers Reynolds and Brandt, claiming they had followed proper procedure while responding to reports of suspicious activity in the area. The statement made no mention of the fact that no such reports had been filed that night. Thomas watched the police chief's press conference from his living room, his father beside him. Chief Wilson spoke confidently about the department's commitment to unbiased policing, his words polished and practiced. "We're reviewing the incident thoroughly," the chief said, "but our preliminary findings suggest the officers acted within departmental guidelines." "That's a lie," Thomas said quietly. His father didn't respond, his attention fixed on the screen. When the press conference ended, the senator's phone immediately rang. It was his chief of staff calling about their response. Thomas listened as his father spoke in clipped, Professional tones about scheduling their own press conference, about reaching out to key allies, about damage control. "I'm not doing it," Thomas said when his father hung up. "Not doing what?" "The press conference. I'm not going to stand there and be your political prop." The senator looked stunned. "That's not what this is about, Thomas. This is about getting justice for what happened to you." "Is it? Because all I'm hearing is talk about narratives and damage control." Thomas stood up, needing to move, to do something with the restless energy building inside him. "You want to help me? Then support actual police reform. Change your position. Use your influence to make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else." His father's expression hardened slightly. "It's not that simple, Thomas. These things take time. We need to work within the system." "The system?" Thomas laughed, a bitter sound without humor. "The system that just cleared those officers of any wrongdoing?" "That system?" Their argument was interrupted by another call, this time from Elena Cortez. She wanted to interview Thomas to get his side of the story. The senator took the phone, speaking to her himself, arranging details. "She'll be here in an hour," he said after hanging up. "This is our chance to shape the story." Thomas shook his head in disbelief. "You still don't get it." The tension between them remained as they waited for Elena to arrive. Thomas stood by the window, watching people on the street below going about their normal lives, wondering if any of them had seen the video, if they were talking about it, if they even cared. Elena arrived exactly on time. Professional, but with genuine concern in her eyes when she saw Thomas's bruised face. She set up her equipment in his living room. A small camera, a microphone, nothing intrusive. "I want to thank you again for last night," Thomas said as she worked. "If you hadn't been there..." "I'm glad I was," she replied simply. "What happened to you was wrong. People need to see it." The interview began with standard questions. His account of what happened, his feelings afterward, his response to the police department's statement. Thomas answered honestly, his voice steady even as he described the fear and humiliation he had felt. Then Elena asked the question he had been dreading. "Your father, Senator Elliott, has consistently opposed police reform legislation throughout his career. Has this incident changed your view of his position?" The senator, sitting just off camera, stiffened visibly. Thomas felt the weight of the moment, the expectation to be loyal, to support his father publicly. "I've always respected my father's political views, even when we disagreed," he began carefully. "But last night showed me something I'd only understood in theory before. There's a difference between hearing about injustice and experiencing it firsthand." He paused, looking directly at Elena. "I believe we need meaningful police reform, not just because of what happened to me, but because it happens to people every day who don't have the protection of a senator's name, who don't have reporters showing up to film it, who don't have the resources to fight back." Elena nodded, then glanced at the senator. "Senator Elliott, would you like to respond to that?" The camera turned to capture his father's face, carefully composed but with conflict evident in his eyes. "My son's experience has given me much to think about. My primary concern right now is for his well-being and for justice in this specific case." It was a politician's answer, non-committal and safe. Thomas felt a wave of disappointment but said nothing more. After Elena left, the silence in the apartment grew heavy. His father made phone calls, spoke to his staff, arranged meetings with police officials and community leaders. Thomas watched this familiar routine with new eyes, seeing the calculation behind every move. That night, alone in his apartment after his father finally left, Thomas sat in darkness, replaying the events in his mind. His phone continued to buzz with messages of support, interview requests, even calls from old friends he hadn't spoken to in years. He ignored them all, opening his laptop instead. The bruises on his body would heal, but something else had been damaged. His sense of safety, his belief in justice, his relationship with his father. As he began typing, searching for cases similar to his own, Thomas made a silent promise to himself. This would not end with press conferences and political maneuvering. He would find the truth about Officers Reynolds and Brandt, about why they had targeted him, about how many others had suffered similar or worse treatment without a camera present to record it. Outside his window, the city continued its nighttime rhythm, unaware that Thomas Elliott had changed irrevocably, set on a path that would eventually lead to places darker than he could imagine. 3 weeks after the incident, Thomas sat in the back of a small conference room at the police headquarters, watching as Internal Affairs Lieutenant Grace Chen presented her preliminary findings. The room was tense, filled with police officials, the city attorney, and Senator Elliott's legal team. Thomas had insisted on attending despite his father's objections. "Our investigation has uncovered several concerning patterns in Officer Reynolds' service record," Lieutenant Chen said, her voice steady and professional. She clicked through slides on a projector, each one detailing complaints against Reynolds spanning his 15 years on the force. There have been 7 formal complaints of excessive force and 12 allegations of racial bias in his conduct. However, none resulted in disciplinary action. Thomas leaned forward, his attention fully captured. This confirmed what he'd suspected during the weeks he'd spent researching police misconduct cases instead of studying for his law finals. "What about Officer Brandt?" asked William Harper, the lawyer Senator Elliott had hired for Thomas. Lieutenant Chen changed slides. "Officer Brandt has been with the department for 3 years. There are no formal complaints in his record." "The junior partner," Thomas said quietly, almost to himself. His father shot him a warning look. Lieutenant Chen continued, "However, our investigation has uncovered text messages between Officers Reynolds and Brandt from the night in question." She hesitated, glancing at Thomas. "The content of these messages is concerning." The city attorney shifted uncomfortably. "Lieutenant, given the ongoing nature of this investigation, I want to see them," Thomas interrupted. "They're about me. I have a right to know." After a brief discussion, Lieutenant Chen displayed the messages on screen. Thomas read them in silence, his stomach tightening with each word. Reynolds, 8:42 p.m. "Guess who's on patrol in the senator's neighborhood? Tonight, Brandt, 8:45 p.m. Lucky you, Reynolds, 9:12 p.m. Saw his kid's car at the university earlier. Bet he drives home this way, Brandt, 9:14 p.m. The law student? What are you thinking? Reynolds, 9:16 p.m. Time to teach the senator what happens when you try to cut our budget, Brandt, 9:17 p.m. Don't do anything stupid, Reynolds, 9:19 p.m. Just a lesson. Nothing that leaves marks. Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. The room had gone completely still. "They planned it," Senator Elliott said, his voice low and dangerous. "They deliberately targeted my son." Lieutenant Chen nodded grimly. "It appears so. There's more." After the incident, when the video began circulating online, Reynolds, 2:14 a.m. Damage control time. Stick to the story. Suspicious vehicle report, Brandt, 2:17 a.m. There was no report, Reynolds, 2:19 a.m. There is now. Just filed it, backdated, Brandt, 2:20 a.m. Is that why the chief called me? Reynolds, 2:22 a.m. We're covered, trust me. The brass won't let this touch them. The city attorney cleared his throat. In light of this evidence, the department is prepared to terminate both officers immediately. Terminate them? Senator Elliott stood up, his voice rising. They should be charged with falsifying police reports, misuse of authority, civil rights violations. Richard, Harper touched the senator's arm, warning him to calm down. We'll discuss next steps privately. The meeting concluded shortly after, with promises of further investigation and appropriate action. As they left the building, Thomas noticed how the officers they passed either stared openly or deliberately avoided eye contact. The blue wall was closing ranks, even as 2 of their own were about to be sacrificed. Outside, reporters waited on the sidewalk, cameras raised as soon as they spotted Thomas and his father. Senator Elliott stepped forward, shielding his son from the flashing lights. "We're encouraged by the internal investigation's findings," the senator stated, his political voice in place, measured, authoritative. "We expect full accountability and transparency as this process continues." Thomas let the words wash over him, feeling oddly disconnected from the performance. While his father handled the press, Thomas slipped away to the car where their driver waited. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When he opened it, he froze. "This isn't over, rich boy. Watch your back." He deleted it immediately, his hand shaking slightly. He hadn't told his father about the other messages he'd received over the past weeks. The anonymous calls, the cars that sometimes followed him from campus, the sense of being watched. Each time he considered reporting it, he remembered how the system had protected Reynolds for 15 years despite multiple complaints. By the time his father joined him in the car, Thomas had composed himself, tucking the fear away where it had lived since that night. A constant companion, but one he was learning to control. "The district attorney is reviewing the case," Senator Elliott said as they pulled away from the curb. "I spoke with her yesterday. They'll likely bring charges against both officers." Thomas nodded but said nothing. He'd been doing his own research, spending hours in the law library reading similar cases. He knew the statistics, the precedents, the reality of how these situations typically ended. "I've been thinking about what you said," his father continued after a moment. "About police reform." He looked out the window, his profile stern in the afternoon light. "The oversight bill comes up for a vote next month. I'm reconsidering my position." Thomas turned to him, surprised. "Really? What happened to you?" His father's voice faltered slightly. "It shouldn't happen to anyone. I've been blind to certain realities. That's on me." It was the closest thing to an admission of error Thomas had ever heard from his father. For a moment he felt a flicker of hope, but the moment passed quickly as his phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. He didn't check it. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings with lawyers, statements to prosecutors, and reporters camped outside Thomas's apartment building. He'd given up on finishing his semester, accepting the dean's offer of incomplete grades with the option to make up the work over the summer. His focus had narrowed to a single purpose: understanding what had happened to him and why. Late one night, as he scrolled through news articles about the case, an email arrived from Elena Cortez. The subject line read simply, "You should see this." The email contained a link to an unlisted video and a brief message. Source inside the department sent this: "Be careful who you show it to." Thomas clicked the link, putting on headphones as the video began to play. It showed what appeared to be a locker room, several officers changing after their shift. He recognized Reynolds immediately, his back to the camera as he spoke to a group of other officers. "So the senator's kid thinks he can get us fired. We'll see about that." Reynolds' voice was clear, confident. "I've got friends in places he can't touch. This'll blow over in a few weeks, mark my words." Another officer, face not visible to the camera, spoke up. "The texts look bad, James. Internal Affairs has a solid case." Reynolds laughed. "IA works for the same people I do." "You think the chief wants this going any further?" "It implicates half the department. The senator will get his show, will take a few months of paid leave, and then it's business as usual." Thomas watched the entire video twice, his heart pounding. This wasn't just about two rogue officers. It was systemic. He forwarded the video to Harper with a brief note explaining its source, then sat back, exhausted but unable to sleep. His phone buzzed again, another message from an unknown number. This time he opened it. "We know where you live. We know your routine. Think about that next time you're alone." Thomas stared at the words, a cold certainty settling over him. He went to his medicine cabinet and found the prescription his doctor had given him for anxiety after the incident. He'd resisted taking the pills, but tonight, with his hands shaking and his heart racing, he swallowed one, then another when the first didn't seem to work fast enough. The next morning, Thomas woke to pounding on his door. It was Harper, his father's lawyer, looking grave. "The DA's office called," Harper said once Thomas let him in. "They've decided not to press criminal charges against Reynolds or Brandt." Thomas sat down hard on his couch. Why?" "Insufficient evidence to secure a conviction," they said. Harper's disgust was evident. "They're offering the officers administrative leave pending further investigation." "Administrative leave," Thomas repeated. "Paid vacation, you mean?" "Your father is furious. He's calling in favors, pushing for a Department of Justice investigation." Harper sat beside him. "This isn't over, Thomas," but Thomas barely heard him. The pills he'd taken the night before had left him with a foggy head and a strange detachment. Even his anger felt distant, as if it belonged to someone else. "I received threats," Thomas said suddenly. "Text messages. Someone's been following me." Harper's expression darkened. "Why didn't you say anything?" "We need to report this. To who?" Thomas laughed bitterly. "The police." Over the following days, as news of the DA's decision spread, protests formed outside the police headquarters. Senator Elliott gave passionate speeches about justice and accountability, his poll numbers rising as he positioned himself as a reformer. Thomas watched it all from a distance, increasing his medication when the anxiety became too much to bear. He stopped attending his father's press conferences, stopped answering calls from reporters, stopped leaving his apartment except when necessary. The only person he maintained contact with was Elena, who continued to investigate Reynolds's history and the department's handling of complaints. She sent him files, recordings, statements from other victims who had come forward after seeing Thomas's story. One night, as Thomas reviewed these materials, mixing information with medication to keep the panic at bay, he came across a name that made him sit up straight. Michael Wilson. Not just any Michael Wilson, but Chief Michael Wilson, the same police chief who had defended Reynolds and Brandt at the press conference. According to the documents Elena had sent, Chief Wilson had been Reynolds's direct supervisor 10 years ago when the first complaints were filed. He had personally dismissed 3 of them, citing lack of corroborating evidence. As the puzzle pieces clicked into place, Thomas felt a clarity he hadn't experienced in weeks. This wasn't just about 2 officers or even 1 department. It was about a system designed to protect itself at all costs, even at the expense of justice. He reached for his phone to call Elena, but hesitated when he saw a new message notification. Unknown number again. His finger hovered over it, then pressed open. Final warning. Back off or things get worse. Much worse. Thomas stared at the screen, something inside him hardening into resolve. They thought they could frighten him into silence just as they had frightened others before him. But they had made a critical mistake in choosing their target. They had given the son of a powerful senator a first-hand education in exactly how the system failed those it was meant to protect. He took a screenshot of the threat, adding it to his growing file of evidence, then swallowed another pill to quiet the fear that still lived in his chest. Tomorrow he would take everything to Elena, the threats, the connection to Chief Wilson, all of it. Let them come after him. He was already living in darkness. At least now, he had a purpose in it. 2 months after the incident, Thomas sat across from his father at an upscale restaurant downtown, picking at his food while Senator Elliott discussed strategy with Harper. The private dining room hummed with quiet conversation as waiters moved discreetly around them, refilling water glasses and removing barely touched plates. The civil case is strong, Harper said, sliding documents across the table. The text messages alone prove intent. Add the video evidence and the officer's history. We could be looking at a substantial settlement. Thomas looked up from his untouched steak. I don't want a settlement. His father sighed, the sound heavy with fatigue. The past months had aged him visibly. New lines around his eyes, more gray in his hair. Thomas, we've discussed this. A settlement is the surest path to some form of justice. Criminal charges aren't happening. Justice? Thomas repeated, the word bitter on his tongue. How is money justice? It's accountability, Harper interjected gently. It hits the department where it hurts, their budget. Forces policy change. Thomas shook his head, reaching into his jacket pocket for his pill bottle. He'd become practiced at taking medication discreetly, turning slightly away as he dry-swallowed a pill. The bottle was getting lighter. He'd need to refill the prescription soon. The Department of Justice investigation is moving forward, his father continued, pretending not to notice. I've been assured they're taking this seriously. These things take time, but... Time, Thomas interrupted. It's been 2 months. Reynolds and Brandt are still on paid leave. Chief Wilson still has his job. Nothing has changed. The senator leaned forward, lowering his voice. Things are changing, Thomas. The police reform bill passed committee yesterday. It's headed for a floor vote next week. The watered-down version, Thomas countered. No real accountability measures. No independent oversight board. Politics is the art of compromise, son. Not when it comes to basic rights. Thomas pushed his plate away. Not when it comes to justice. The tension between them had become a familiar presence, like another person at the table. Once close, father and son now navigated conversations carefully, both aware of the growing distance between them. Elena Cortez called me yesterday, Thomas said after a moment. She's publishing a series on police misconduct next week. I gave her an interview. His father went still. Without consulting me? Without Harper present? I don't need your permission. Our legal counsel. Thomas met his father's gaze steadily. I told her everything, the threats, the connection to Chief Wilson, all of it. Thomas, Harper began, his voice careful. While I understand your frustration, public accusations against the chief could complicate our legal strategy. I'm not interested in strategy. Thomas replied. I'm interested in truth. Senator Elliott set down his fork with deliberate calm. And what happens when these officers retaliate? When the chief uses his position to make things worse for you? The threats you've received will continue whether I speak out or not. Thomas stood, suddenly needing to leave. I have to go. I have an appointment. His father reached for his arm. Thomas, please. We're trying to protect you. No, Thomas said quietly. You're trying to control the situation. There's a difference. He left the restaurant through the back entrance, avoiding the photographers who had taken to following him. His appointment was a lie. He had nowhere to be. In the 2 months since the incident, his life had contracted to a small circuit between his apartment, the law library, and Elena's office. He'd withdrawn from friends, abandoned his routines, lost interest in the future he'd once planned so carefully. What remained was a singular focus on exposing the truth, a purpose that sustained him when panic threatened to overwhelm him, when sleep evaded him, when the pills became necessary just to face the day. Thomas walked for blocks, no particular destination in mind, his thoughts churning. He'd sent Elena everything he had, the threatening texts, the evidence connecting Reynolds to Wilson, the pattern of dismissed complaints against officers in the 5th Precinct. Her series would expose it all. His phone vibrated. A text from Elena. Got the green light. Series runs Monday. Editor is ecstatic. This will make waves. A moment later, another text from a different number. Big mistake talking to the reporter. Thomas froze mid-step. The threat was clear, but something about this one felt different. The timing too precise. It was as if they knew about Elena's series, about his interview. As if they were listening. He hurried back to his apartment, checking over his shoulder repeatedly. Inside, he double-locked the door and closed all the blinds before pulling out his laptop. His hands shook slightly as he typed out an email to Elena, warning her about the text and his suspicions. The next day, the civil lawsuit was filed. Harper had prepared the documents despite Thomas's reluctance, and Senator Elliott had insisted they move forward. The suit named Reynolds, Brandt, Chief Wilson, and the city as defendants, seeking damages for civil rights violations, emotional distress, and conspiracy. Thomas watched the news coverage from his apartment, the voices from the television washing over him as he sorted through his pill bottles, anxiety medication, sleeping pills, something for the headaches that had become constant companions. He couldn't remember which one he'd taken last or how many. They blurred together just like the days. His phone rang, his father again. Thomas let it go to voicemail. They'd barely spoken since the restaurant, their relationship deteriorating further with each passing week. The senator was focused on the lawsuit, on his reform bill, on the political implications of every development. Thomas was focused only on the truth, on ensuring Elena's story reached the public unfiltered by political calculation or legal strategy. When the doorbell rang, Thomas tensed. He wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, he approached the door and looked through the peephole. It was Elena, looking worried. He let her in quickly. I got your email, she said without preamble. I'm concerned, Thomas. These threats are escalating. I know. He led her to his living room where papers and files covered every surface. His research, his evidence, his obsession for the past 2 months. But the timing of that last text. How did they know? Elena looked around the cluttered apartment, concern deepening in her eyes. Have you been sleeping? Eating? Thomas ignored the question. I think they're monitoring my phone. Maybe yours too, Thomas. She touched his arm gently. I think you need to take a step back. You look exhausted. He pulled away, moving to his desk where more files waited. I can't step back, not now. Not when we're close to exposing them. Elena was quiet for a moment, watching him shuffle through papers with shaking hands. The first article runs on Monday, she said finally. It details Reynolds' history, the complaints against him, Wilson's role in burying them. Your case is central to the narrative. Thomas nodded, barely listening as he searched for a specific document. Good. What about the threats? Are you including those? Yes, but... She hesitated. My editor wants more corroboration. These texts came from burner phones. We can't prove who sent them? We know who sent them. Thomas's voice rose sharply. It's them. Reynolds, his buddies on the force? I believe you, Elena said carefully. But we need evidence that would stand up in court. Thomas laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Court? Like the criminal charges that never materialized? Like the civil case that will drag on for years before settling quietly? Elena stepped closer, her voice softening. This story will make a difference, Thomas. People will know the truth. Will they care? Thomas turned to face her, suddenly exhausted. Or will they read it, feel outraged for a day or two, then move on to the next scandal? Before Elena could answer, Thomas's phone rang. His father again. This time he answered, putting it on speaker. Thomas, I just got a call from the city attorney, the senator said, his voice tight with suppressed excitement. They want to settle the lawsuit. 7 figures, policy changes, officer terminations. They're scared of what's coming. Thomas and Elena exchanged looks. The series, she mouthed silently. When? Thomas asked his father. They want to meet tomorrow. If we reach an agreement, we could announce by Monday. Monday, the same day Elena's first article was scheduled to run. Thomas closed his eyes, suddenly understanding. They know about Elena's investigation. They're trying to get ahead of it, bury it with a settlement announcement. His father was quiet for a moment. Does it matter? If we get what we want, it matters, Thomas interrupted. The settlement will come with non-disclosure agreements, won't it? They'll silence us legally. It's standard procedure, the senator admitted. But Thomas, think about this. Real policy change. Reynolds and Brandt fired. Substantial compensation for what you went through. Thomas looked at Elena, then at the piles of evidence surrounding them, the product of 2 months of sleepless nights and growing paranoia. I need to think about it. After he hung up, Elena shook her head. They're panicking. Your father is right, this is a good sign. But once you sign those NDAs, the full story dies. Thomas finished. The public never knows how deep it goes, how many others have been victimized. Elena nodded. It's your decision, Thomas. Whatever you choose, I'll respect it. That night, after Elena left, Thomas sat alone in his darkened apartment, weighing his options. The pills helped quiet his racing thoughts, but clarity remained elusive. A settlement meant closure, financial security, some measure of justice. It meant Reynolds and Brandt would lose their jobs. It meant policy changes that might help prevent similar incidents, but it also meant silence. It meant Chief Wilson and others higher up would escape scrutiny. It meant the system would continue largely unchanged, protected by confidential settlements and careful public relations. Thomas's phone lit up with a text from his father. Think about tomorrow. This could be over. You could move on with your life, move on. The concept seemed foreign to Thomas now. The person he'd been before that night, confident, secure, ambitious, felt like a stranger. How did you move on from learning that the world wasn't what you thought it was? That justice was negotiable, that truth could be bought and sold. Another text arrived, this one from an unknown number. Take the deal. Last chance. Thomas stared at the message, a cold clarity finally settling over him. They were offering him a way out, a return to privilege and comfort. The easy path? The path of compromise. His father had said politics was the art of compromise. Perhaps that was true, but Thomas wasn't a politician. He was a witness, a victim, a voice, he called Elena. I've decided, he said when she answered. I won't take the settlement. I won't sign any NDAs. The story runs as planned. Are you sure? Elena asked. This is your chance to put this behind you. I'm sure. Thomas looked around at the evidence he'd collected, at what his life had become. Some things shouldn't be compromised. The next morning, Thomas met his father at Harper's office. The senator arrived looking hopeful, already planning his statement for the press conference that would announce the settlement. The city attorney would be arriving shortly with the paperwork. I'm not signing, Thomas said before his father could speak. I won't take the settlement. Senator Elliott stared at him in disbelief. Thomas, this is everything we've fought for. Everything you've suffered for. No, Thomas replied quietly. It's a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. It changes nothing that matters. You're not thinking clearly, his father insisted, gesturing at Harper for support. The stress, the medication. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in months, Thomas interrupted. The story runs on Monday, all of it. The truth matters more than money. His father's face hardened. And what about your future? Your career? Once you go down this path, there's no turning back. Thomas met his father's gaze steadily. I know. The distance between them, growing for months, suddenly seemed unbridgeable. Two men looking at the same reality but seeing entirely different worlds. The politician and the idealist, the pragmatist and the truth-seeker. "I can't support this decision," Senator Elliott said finally. "I can't watch you destroy yourself." "I'm not asking you to," Thomas replied. "I'm just asking you to respect my choice." As his father turned to leave, Thomas felt a strange mixture of loss and liberation. The path ahead was uncertain, dangerous even, but for the first time since that night, he felt sure of his direction. The truth, uncompromised and unsilenced, was worth whatever came next, even if what came next was darkness. On Monday morning, Elena's first article hit the front page of the paper and instantly spread online. The headline was stark: "Pattern of Abuse: How Police Protected Their Own While Targeting Senator's Son." Accompanying the piece was Thomas's photo, the bruise on his forehead still visible, his expression solemn but determined. By noon, every major news outlet had picked up the story. Thomas's phone buzzed constantly with notifications, calls, and messages, some supportive, others threatening. He ignored them all, sitting alone in his apartment with the blinds drawn, watching the fallout unfold on his laptop screen. Chief Wilson held an emergency press conference, his face stiff as he denied any wrongdoing while announcing that Officers Reynolds and Brandt had been placed on unpaid leave pending further investigation. The mayor promised a thorough review of department policies. Police union representatives defended the officers, questioning Thomas's motives and credibility. Through it all, Thomas remained silent, declining interview requests and avoiding public appearances. The story would speak for itself. Elena's reporting was meticulous, built on months of research and backed by evidence that couldn't be easily dismissed. Each day that week, a new article appeared, exposing deeper layers of misconduct and institutional protection. Tuesday, Blue Wall of Silence: How Complaints Against Officer Reynolds Were Buried. Wednesday, Chief Implicated, Wilson's Role in Covering Up Police Misconduct. Thursday, Patterns of Targeting: Other Victims Come Forward. Friday, Rejected Settlement: Why Thomas Elliott Chose Truth Over Money. That last headline had triggered a brief, tense call from his father. The senator was furious that Thomas had disclosed the settlement offer to Elena, seeing it as a betrayal of family privacy. Thomas listened without argument, too exhausted to explain again why transparency mattered more than political calculation. "You've made your choice," his father had said finally, his voice cold. "I hope you can live with the consequences." The consequences weren't long in coming. By the second week, Thomas noticed unmarked cars parked outside his apartment building, following him when he ventured out. His email account was hacked, his private messages to Elena posted on anonymous forums. Death threats arrived daily. Some slipped under his door despite the building's security system. His dependency on medication deepened. The anxiety pills barely took the edge off anymore, so he doubled the dose, then tripled it, washing them down with whatever was at hand: water, coffee, sometimes alcohol when the panic was particularly bad. Sleep came only in short nightmare-filled bursts, leaving him perpetually exhausted. Elena worried openly about his deteriorating condition. "You need help, Thomas," she told him during one of her visits, eyeing the pill bottles scattered across his coffee table. "Professional help. Not just for the anxiety, but for what happened to you. The trauma." Thomas had brushed off her concern. "I'm fine. Just tired. This will all settle down once the full story is out." But it didn't settle down. As Elena's investigation continued into its third week, the backlash intensified. Police supporters organized protests outside the newspaper office. Online campaigns questioned Thomas's character, digging into his past for anything that might discredit him. Old girlfriends were contacted for unflattering stories. Former classmates were asked about his behavior in school. When none of that yielded useful material, the attacks became more personal. Rumors spread that Thomas had been intoxicated the night of the incident, that he had provoked the officers, that the entire story was fabricated to advance his father's political agenda. Through it all, Thomas retreated further into isolation. He stopped attending his law classes altogether, eventually withdrawing from the semester formally when the dean called with concerns about his absence. He rarely left his apartment, ordering groceries online and having them left outside his door. His only regular visitor was Elena, who brought updates on the investigation and increasingly worried glances. One evening in early July, nearly 6 months after the incident, Thomas sat on his couch staring at a bottle of sleeping pills. He'd been awake for nearly 48 hours, his thoughts racing despite the medication. The walls of his apartment seemed to close in around him, covered as they were with printed articles, police reports, and case notes, the physical manifestation of his obsession. His phone rang, Elena calling for their daily check-in. He let it go to voicemail, then listened as her concerned voice filled the quiet room. "Thomas, it's me. I'm worried about you. Please call back. I have news about Reynolds. The department is trying to quietly transfer him to another precinct. We need to talk about how to respond. Call me back, okay? Please." Thomas set the phone down and looked again at the pill bottle. It would be so easy to just sleep, to escape the constant fear and anger, if only for a few hours. He opened the bottle, pouring several pills into his palm, then a few more. He hadn't been keeping track of his dosage lately. The lines between medication and self-medication had blurred weeks ago. His laptop chimed with an email notification. Mechanically, he checked it. It was from Harper, his father's lawyer, with a brief message. "Call me immediately. Important development in your case." Thomas hesitated, then dialed Harper's number, the pill still in his hand. "Thomas, thank God." Harper answered immediately. "I've been trying to reach you. Your father's been trying to reach you." "What is it?" Thomas asked, his voice flat. "The Department of Justice is announcing formal charges against Reynolds, Brandt, and 3 other officers tomorrow morning. Civil rights violations, evidence tampering, conspiracy. They're also opening an investigation into Chief Wilson." Thomas closed his eyes, the news washing over him without the triumph he might once have felt. "Because of Elena's articles?" "Partly," Harper admitted, "but also because of your father." "My father?" Thomas opened his eyes, confusion cutting through his exhaustion. "After you rejected the settlement, he's been working behind the scenes, calling in favors at the Justice Department, meeting with investigators, sharing information. He didn't tell you because—" Harper paused. "Well, because you two weren't speaking." Thomas stared at the pills in his hand, then slowly poured them back into the bottle. "He didn't support my decision." "No, he didn't," Harper agreed. "But he respected it. And once you made it clear you were choosing truth over compromise, he decided to do everything in his power to make sure that truth led to justice." After hanging up, Thomas sat motionless, trying to process this unexpected development. His father had been working silently alongside him all this time, in his own way, through his own channels. The realization brought a complex mix of emotions: gratitude, regret for the months of estrangement, a tentative hope. His phone rang again, his father this time. Thomas answered. "I just talked to Harper," he said before his father could speak. "Then you know." The senator's voice sounded tired but satisfied. "It's not everything we wanted, but it's a start. Real accountability. Why didn't you tell me what you were doing?" His father was quiet for a moment. "You chose your path, I chose mine. We were both working toward the same end. I thought you'd given up on justice, chosen politics instead. No." The word was simple but firm. "I never gave up. I just had different tools at my disposal." The conversation continued, tentative at first, then warming as months of misunderstanding began to dissolve. Thomas found himself sharing the toll the past months had taken, the isolation, the anxiety, the pills. His father listened without judgment, then made a gentle suggestion. "Come stay with me for a while, just until the media circus dies down. The house is secure, private. You can rest. Really rest." Thomas looked around his apartment, at the evidence of his obsession pinned to every wall, at the pill bottles scattered across tables, at the physical manifestation of what his life had become. "I'll think about it." That night, for the first time in months, Thomas slept without medication. The sleep wasn't peaceful or untroubled, but it was natural, his body finally surrendering to exhaustion. He woke to sunlight filtering through the blinds and dozens of notifications on his phone. The Justice Department announcement had been made early that morning, sending shockwaves through the police department and the city. Elena had sent him links to the coverage along with a simple message: "We did it." As Thomas scrolled through the news, a different notification appeared, a text from an unknown number. His finger hesitated over it, expecting another threat. But when he opened it, the message was different. Thank you for telling your story. Because of you, my case is being reopened. I'm not alone anymore." Thomas read the message twice, something shifting inside him. In the darkest months, he'd lost sight of why he'd chosen this path, why the truth mattered more than his comfort or security. This was why. Not just his own justice, but justice for others who hadn't had a senator father or a reporter friend or the resources to fight back. Later that day, Thomas packed a small bag and called his father to accept his offer. As he prepared to leave the apartment that had become both sanctuary and prison, his phone rang. Elena again. "Did you see the news?" she asked when he answered. "It's happening, Thomas. Everything we fought for." "I saw," he replied, looking around the apartment one last time. "How many others have come forward?" 17 so far, Elena said, excitement in her voice. "And the Justice Department is setting up a hotline for more. This is going to change everything." Thomas thought of the pills he'd flushed down the toilet that morning, of the dark place he'd nearly surrendered to. "Not everything," he said quietly, "but something, and that's enough for now." 6 months later, Thomas stood at his father's side as the senator signed the Police Accountability Act into law, comprehensive legislation that established independent oversight boards, ended qualified immunity for officers who violated civil rights, and created new protections for victims of police misconduct. The bill was informally known as Thomas's Law, though he'd rejected efforts to name it officially after him. His father had championed it fiercely, crossing party lines and defying political advisors who warned it might end his career. Thomas had spent those 6 months slowly rebuilding himself, getting proper treatment for his anxiety and PTSD, reconnecting with friends, eventually returning to law school with a new focus on civil rights law. The nightmares hadn't stopped completely, and he still tensed when police cars passed him on the street. Some wounds healed slowly, if they healed at all. But as he watched his father hand the ceremonial signing pen to a mother whose son had been a victim of police violence before Thomas's case brought accountability, he felt something he hadn't expected to feel again. Hope. Not the naive hope of his earlier life, but something tempered and resilient. Justice wasn't a destination you reached once and celebrated. It was a path you walked every day, often uphill, sometimes alone. Thomas had learned this at terrible cost. But he'd also learned that walking that path, however difficult, was the only way forward from darkness into light.